presentation that there it is. A presentation that could last like an hour and maybe 45 minutes. So I will cut, and the talk will be not more than 45. But I have some material that maybe I will not be able to show to you, and I will resume at the end. But when you invited me, and Ivan said, well, our main interest is to talk about what about research excellence in the context of open science, but you told me that the seminar series was called The Global Knowledge Production and Academic Semi-Periphery. I thought it was interesting maybe to start by telling you something that happened very recently, which is that the discussion on the concept of academic dependency, which for me has been very relevant in during many years and from my doctoral formation onwards, it came to a point around 2008 in which I started to make a critical reading of this concept, the concept of academic dependency. And I will go back to this now. But it's interesting to me that only these last months, the discussion with who I had this major exchange that was very important for me at those times. The two persons were Sujata Patel from India and Said Faria Latas from Singapore. And now we are all involved in the decolonization forum that is going to be held in Istanbul next May. And so in this discussion, we are involved with other Latin American intellectuals that were very important for me on those years, like Arturo Escobar and Walter Mignolo. And the discussion is pretty interesting because it's to try to go back to the idea or the framework of academic dependency in the context of the discussion also of coloniality of knowledge. And so if you now see the first slide that I presented here, I would just like to go to the idea of a semi-periphery as a first start for this talk. When you in the seminar, and of course I would be very happy to see how you interpret this, but to talk about the semi-periphery in terms of the academic field, which means we are not just making translation or a direct conceptual transition from the economic type of focus of peripheries, central or peripheries in terms of the economic world system. It means a lot of things. It means a decision, because to speak about the semi-periphery and academic semi-periphery means, first of all, that we will be speaking about a nation, because the unit of analysis of the whole center periphery focus in economy had to do with the national space as a unit of analysis. And it also could mean that a semi-periphery could become a center at some point, right? Or it could become, or it could be a periphery or in a transition to the center. So when I started this discussion with Farida Latas and the people from, well, Sujata Patel, etc., at those times, and particularly with this concept of coloniality of knowledge, which is different from coloniality of power, in those years, the first thing that came to me was that the case of Latin America was clearly not a semi-periphery. First of all, because we had to do this analysis in terms of a region and not necessarily in terms of countries and comparisons in between nations. And the other issue was that in my case, I prefer to use in those years the idea of the peripheral centers, because these could be centers within a region, for example, a given national field like Argentina or Brazil or Mexico and Latin America. They could be considered a center in terms of some of its domination within the region, but it was peripheral comparing to the world academic system in terms of the economy, if you want, or the mainstream science in terms of our academic discussions. But when all the studies that we made started in those years, or 25 years ago, 20 years ago, well, we started to find this concept of circuit, which tried to express the fact that it's not only a matter of comparing just nations or the output of a given national field with another, and that the center periphery focus, the economic school that created this, and that in Latin America is our structuralism, Latin American structuralism, well, really always thought in terms of the comparison between countries. But there is also another tradition that's the one that I've taken within this same school, which is the tradition of structural heterogeneity. And this is what we started to see here, that if you look at this figure, the green part represents what we could call this world system, the global science, if you want. But the brown, smaller field that says national field, well, at first we could say, if we talk about only the opposition between peripheries and centers, we would be analyzing this as a very homogeneous space. While what we could see is that different circuits, and particularly because of the importance of publishing, different circuits cross through completely these national fields. And it's not that these circuits erase the national field. And that's why we have a Bourdieusian, very strong amount of tools that are working in this theoretical framework, because the national field, and particularly in Latin America, is very clear as it works related to the institutional policies, evaluative policies, and research assessment. It works a lot in terms of the national resources, etc. But the prestige that we started finding in our empirical studies was not only one prestige, what we could call like an international prestige, a scientific global prestige, but we started to find evidence of different kinds of prestige. And so, well, you would say, is this, are you trying to tell me that the center periphery opposition does not exist? No, but it's a lot more complex than that, because the relation between what was called mainstream science, or what could even today be called mainstream science, is not what really organizes the empirical relations or power relations between national fields or circuits. That's part of the narrative that was built at some point of time, and the accumulation of academic symbolic prestige or symbolic capital has been organized around this idea of the idea of the mainstream publishing. So is really is there any kind of imposition of global standards? We could say yes, and that's why I say, well, the difference between the mainstream science and the peripheral science was attempted to be imposed through the global standards. I think one of the main things that was very successful in this sense was the idea of academic excellence, and the academic excellence completely linked to the impact factor, to these central or very powerful sources such as the Science Citation Index first, and then Scopus, etc. This was implemented through the evaluation systems, and that's why it has such an important role here in Latin America. And I can see some of the Argentinians, like I was saying hello to Noelia Gamisi or Lucia, the other Argentinian friends that I see there. They know perfectly well that in Latin America, this was imposed in the 1990s through these research assessment systems and what we call the accreditation systems. The idea was to create an external classification to the universities, a national one that said, well, you are an excellent researcher. And this was imposed, like these arrows showing, from north to south. But the problem is to believe that this was imposed like some kind of a colonialism or academic imperialism. When you really do these empirical studies, you find that there were different types of compromise negotiation between the universities and these global standards, and not all was imposed as we sometimes tend to believe. Even if from the South, the critical studies from the South have been very fond of this idea that the mainstream is in the north, the mainstream is in the higher positions in hierarchy, and always the peripheral science is marginal, is always, like in the bottom or in the last place. But if you now see this figure that I built here and the national scientific field that could be, for example, Argentina, what we found was that these global standards were not imposed completely. And the universities and the different institutions that play a role in the field definitely played a role in the coexistence of different principles of legitimation. So that's why it was so important to me and to our team to work on these circuits of recognition and to try to find, what are the causal factors, the explanation of these different circuits? How could they survive, for example, the local circuits? Or how could the Latin American circuit as a publishing space, a regional space, how could it survive with let's say today, at least 10,000 journals, maybe half of them indexed in different services, but the rest without even any indexation? How did they survive if this was some kind of colonialism? So that was the first part of that I wanted to discuss with you, because it is to go back to this idea of shall we call our countries like Mexico, Argentina, or maybe Brazil or Chile semi-peripheries? Is that the word? Is that the concept? Are they peripheral centers? This has been having an evolution in the last 10 years. And this has to do a lot with the evolution of another part of this story that is very relevant. And this has to do with what I put there as contested data sources. Because during the period or the decades that we only had not an oligopoly but a monopoly of a mainstream source to analyze the output of the countries or the researchers, which was the Science Citation Index or the Web of Science or Clarivate, during maybe 4 decades until Scopus came to be created. It's true that there wasn't too many alternatives to analyze internationally these relations of power. But after Scopus and in more recent years, we have a lot new sources to discuss this. And these new sources have to do a lot with these alternative circuits. For example, the Latin American sources that I will mention have always existed, because all the indexation systems in Latin America existed in parallel to the Science Citation Index since the 1960s onwards. And that's what I will try to delve in the time that I have now. So, what role is open science playing in this landscape? Well, first of all, it was like a very big hope to have new open data sources, new open infrastructures that could surpass the commercial feature that all these data sources had in the past. Because mainly remember that the Science Citation Index or the Scopus even were featured by what we could call these closed or subscription type of journals, which each library had to subscribe and pay. And so before open access was like a big movement, it's true that normally the construction of this very hierarchical type of mainstream prestige was concentrated in these type of indexes. And that's why the struggle between the indexes in Latin America and the journals indexed in Latin America in this alternative circuit and the journals indexed in the Science Citation Index, well, had a very different amount or yes, accumulation of prestige, but also citations, and also we have many many studies on this and how these citations were accumulated, right? So open science was a very big hope. At first, this is a movement that has at least 3 or 4 decades, right? The idea and the declaration of open access that was really a hope to bring everything very free and openly in internet. But I will not delve into the details of this because the recommendation of open science is a very broad discussion in which I was part. But the truth is that that first big idea and hope for open access has been has been part of a transition to open access that was very well colonized. This time I'm using this word colonization by the commercial publishers. So in this very simple figure, what you see in between these 20 years that go from 2000 to 2020, well, you can see that, of course, open access has been growing steadily in these 20 years, and we have a lot more open access articles. But also the closed open access has grown because in parallel to the open access movement that pretended to oppose the commercial publishers have been very actively involved in publishing and with what we can call the gold open access in the journals. This has created many effects. One of the effects is that we have now these gold open access journals with very high fees and a constant increase in these APC prices with the asymmetries that these prices generate. What we call the APC gap, which also means intersectional inequalities, not only global south, global north, but also in terms of gender asymmetries. We have also seen a very important growth in predatory publishing or questionable journals, and also a very relevant issue about transparency, because it's even, and the colleagues here know that it's very difficult to study everything that has to do with APC costs because of the lack of transparency of the journals, right? So what I built is this general scheme to analyze what are the different.
Ayer que hora salieron equipos 7:30. Uy, no.
If you have it there, thank you, Jonathan. So in this general scheme, what I try to show is that even with the open access movement and the open access advances that we have, the different type of commercial interventions that we increasingly have in the academic field, in the national, regional, at the global level, we again have different situations and different kinds of relations of power in between infrastructures, researchers, nations, agencies, funders, etc. And so this is just a general scheme to show that if we saw what we can call the open science in general, or the open infrastructures, or the open access in terms of publishing as a field in terms of the Bourdieusian type of interpretation. Well, we still have in the left upper quarter that you see in the scheme the global value that is still very concentrated in the commercial publishers in these journals that have transitioned some of them to the hybrid type of route or the gold route. But to the right, we also have a very open type, and those I believe are still in this type of closedness, still closed type of route, because most of these commercial publishers and the most prestigious journals have a very strong stake on hybrid type of access, right? But in the right hand, you can see that also in the upper corner, in the right hand, you can see that openness could be understood as the general feature of these different actors that work there. But there is where we have all these questionable predatory journals and also some of these forms of extraction that are very dangerous for the global south in general, and increasing asymmetries, of course. In the down in the left and in the right, you can see that we have closeness that have to do with protection of subaltern groups, the concern about digital sovereignty, of course. But in the right, and I'm going a bit fast just because of time, if you want, we can come back with this for the discussion. But on the right hand, you can see, and I have made a circle there, what I think is the feature of the regional circle that I've been mentioning, which is at least in Latin America very clear. We do have a very long-standing tradition of openness. We have regional indexing systems that have really boosted open access. We have federated open infrastructures and a very important bet towards multilingualism. And we, in Latin America, I think these systems are responsible for this resilience of Spanish, Portuguese, and other national languages in our region. We also tend to inclusiveness, but we still have this feature that I mentioned at first, which is that the Latin American circuit is still a peripheral center. Yes, we could say a peripheral center in terms of a region that can be understood as central in terms of diamond publishing, for example, but is still peripheral in terms of visibility. So I would like to mention now this paper, which I was very glad to see, of course, that's here. We are co-authors of this paper, which tries to really make an interpellation to funders, to public agencies, to researchers, in general, all the academic community, in terms of the effects of the commercialization that we have been, and the marketization in general that we've been observing in scholarly publishing, and the drain that this means in terms of money, in terms of time, trust, and control. So I will just leave there that for you to read if you're interested after this webinar. And so I was saying that the data sources that are in the back end of this whole discussion of open science, of open access and scholarly publishing, and the marketization of our academic forms of communication in general, have a lot to do with the different infrastructures that we could have in as the Declaration of Barcelona proposes, we could have in a completely equitative and open framework for the world, but we still don't. And that's what we still see, that we have a lot of asymmetries that have to do with infrastructures and with, particularly with the relationship with the repositories of what we know as general output and data repositories. So in the left, in this world map, you can see that, for example, South America has a very important development of repositories, these kind of output repositories where you can find the doctoral thesis. The digitalization of doctoral or master thesis is very advanced, especially in Brazil, or the national production, which you can find in these repositories, the former libraries. But Africa, of course, with a very, very scarce amount of repositories per countries, that practically you can see that many countries are really in a very white color there. And of course, the major countries in Europe or the United States in very dark blue, which means they have 200 or more repositories. However, we will see later, these repositories can be connected to national research information systems. There are different ways of or potential of these repositories for open science. Now, in the right map here, you can see how everything changes when we talk about data repositories. So the advance of the open data repositories is really very slow in the global south in general, and this is very clear in the map to the right, and particularly is something that we see very clearly in a peripheral center like Latin America in the south, right? I will not delve much in this, but I was saying that it's important to mention that some countries, and in particular in Europe, the universities have a relevant development of systems that are called the current research information systems that really integrate the information on the people, the information on the researchers, the projects, the institutions. They have persistent identifiers for all these actors of the process of research, and so you can find a DOI in any kind of output that you develop or publish. You can find other persistence identifiers that I will mention, but the map that I'm showing you now shows you that in the global south we have a very important problem, a very critical issue around this infrastructure, which is the persistent identifier or for digital resources, so the PIDs. So DOI is one of the main reasons why much of the output of the Latin American countries or the other countries in the world that publish in Latin American journals have less visibility. And so that said, I'm sorry here, we also have very important literature on the study of the relation between these persistent identifiers and the commercial publishers. I particularly am referring here to the Okune and Chan article, where this relation between DOI, ORC-ID, and other persistent identifiers are related to Crossref and the commercial publishers that are behind. And so, just to mention the situation of the PID, the DOIs, particularly in the journals in Latin America, I would like to show you the case, particularly of the journals in Argentina, just the first row for an example. In the OAG, the study that I am referring here by Autier, compared the 383 journals that are indexed in the directory of open access journals, and only 90 of these journals had these persistent identifiers, and 293 journals, complete journals, without these persistent identifiers. It may be an extreme case. There are other Latin Americans with a better situation like Brazil, but it's a very good example of our situation in Latin America. The other persistent identifier for an alternative identifier could be ARC. I'm not going to be able to develop this, but you should know, and maybe if somebody wants, we can go deep in this, that DARC is a regional project related to La Referencia, which is our federation of repositories that is in progress. We have some expectations on this, and we really hope that this creates this blockchain that we need to articulate all these different identifiers and to get out from the hands of these commercial publishers that are dominating completely the visibility, right? ORC-ID is another persistent identifier that has to do with the active researchers. This has many problems, not only because this one is not, you don't have to pay like the DOI, which is the main problem. But in the case of ORC-ID, the problem is different. The problem is repetitions, and it's impossible to make it what I tried to do here, which was a sociological analysis of these researchers by ORC-ID. So I'm going to go fast. The other one is the ROR, the Registry of Research Organizations by country. We also have a comparison here for Argentina that can show you that while in Argentina we have a total of 2,677 institutions or research organizations in our national database, in the ROR, in the registry, we only have 442. So imagine the number of institutions that are not included in this type of source. And so let's now go to why Latin America has become this, let's say, alternative circuit that has had at least a relative power to create some kind of regional prestige or some kind of reward that the researchers have decided to keep publishing in our journals, right? It is a very old type of intellectual field or intellectual circuit. It has more than 200 years of existence, but I'm only taking here from the 1950s until today. The fact that we created in the 1950s national information systems the librarians played an incredibly important role in Latin America during the 50s and the 60s. And we have regional indexing systems that were created since the 1960s. Not only the indexing systems like I'm mentioning here, Clase or Periódica, which are from the 70s, but also regional indexing systems and digital libraries that today you could recognize perfectly, like Claxo or Vireme, but also Latindex, Cielo, Redalic, Biblat, etc. Right? In terms of books also, and in terms of the repositories and the federation that I mentioned before, La Referencia has a very important role in terms of the regional infrastructure that we have. I will not delve in citizen science now. So we do have a regional, very important publishing circuit, which is non-commercial, which is mainly public, which is diamondized, if this word exists. So we have really very important number of titles that are in diamond publishing, which means no fees for readers or for authors. But why is it that when you do the empirical work in Latin America and you analyze where the Latin American researchers publish, they still publish more or less in the social sciences and humanities and some in the agrarian sciences in these journals, but the rest of the researchers still privilege or still believe in the mainstream high impact type of journals, right? So in general, my hypothesis has been always that there is some kind of an alienation between the investment in open infrastructures and the academic evaluation that these journals and these infrastructures have in terms of the evaluation in the institutions and our universities. So where is the power or the fact that Latin America as a regional circuit, we can say it is a peripheral center? Well, in terms of the diamond indexed journals, this cartography tries to show precisely which is the strength of Latin America in terms of diamond journals. Normally, all the studies that the AMAS, for example, or all the European projects have used the source for the landscapes of diamond publishing, and the main report that was published, I think, in 2021 by the AMAS, really was DOAG, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and the information there that could tell us, well, these are no-fee journals. So in that first source, and this is the table that I wanted to show you, this has been updated to October 2025. So because I had another update that I presented in Berlin in 2024. That's why I wanted to tell you that this was updated. And the data set that is uploaded in our repository is the old one, and we are now updating it with this new one. So in DOAG, we checked absolutely the information, and indeed, we could say that to September, October last year, we had almost 14,000 diamond journals. But if we add the journals that come or that are indexed in these other collections, we find, especially Latindex is contributing with 1,631 journals, Cielo and Redalic without overlaps, of course, and without overlaps with the OAG. In between them, we have 697 from Cielo and 270 from Redalic. It doesn't mean that Cielo or Redalic only have these journals, because most of them are multi-indexed with precisely with Latindex. But the total diamond journals that we find when we really incorporate Latin America and this circuit into the count is 17,855 journals. So there is a very important difference. Maybe Latin America is contributing here, as you can see, with 2,500 or 3,000 journals, right? But it's very interesting, and I'm going to go now to language to see that the contribution of these indexing systems, you can see there Cielo, Redalic, Biblat, La Referencia, or Latindex, is allowing Spanish and Portuguese to survive pretty much in terms of the discussion, the general conversation of size, because the contribution for these languages is very important. And OpenAlex is there representing a very important data source. We are all working in this, even though, and some of the friends that are here from Montreal know, even though language is still one of the technical tasks in progress in the studies in OpenAlex. But in terms of what we can completely confirm by the data sources of Latin America, it is pretty clear that Cielo, Redalic, and especially Latindex are contributing to the circulation of knowledge in Spanish and Portuguese. And this is just the expression in the map of the relation between all these data sources. If you allow me, because I only have 10 minutes, I will just go past this and maybe we can come back to this one if you're interested. So the question now is, what is the way forward if we are looking for or struggling against these asymmetries that we've mentioned, if we're struggling to try to understand the conversation of science with all this complexity and heterogeneity that I've been showing. If you take the point of view of Poland, for example, which I've come to know pretty well, working with Emanuel Kulczynski in our paper around, it's called Beyond the Oligopoly. If you look at the national landscapes, many of our countries, and I would say even in Europe, many of the European countries that we compare, they're like Finland or Poland or even I'm thinking on Turkey, they show that there is a very active and dynamical national landscape of journals, and the visibility is the issue. How could we boost the visibility of these alternative circuits, and in a way, how can we really contribute to the evaluation reform that everybody in general is agreeing with the need to do that and to abandon the impact factor? Well, the first question would be, how can we diamondalize or try to boost diamond open access? In this paper that I was mentioning with Vincent, Stephanie Houston, and other people, I was discussing much about this concept of recommunalization, because I'm not really sure that diamond is a very good concept to use, not only because the colonial extractive type of perspective that the word diamond and this awful mineral gives us, but also because of the fact that it's not only a matter of money, it's not only a matter of no fee journal and to give gratuitous access for the people to read or for the people to publish. The problem and the big stake that I can see in the academic publishing or scholarly publishing is really the stake between the commercial side of academic publishing and what we could call the academic, the community-led type of publishing, because this has to do with the intrusion that the commercial publishing or the publishing industry has had in the academic field. So it is, to me, really a very classical Bourdieusian type of stake. So here I'm going to just pass very quickly on the definitions of diamond journals, but I just wanted to show you that most of the discussions include the community-driven or community-led feature of diamond publishing. It's not only a matter of fees or money. And so my proposal to, or the way forward here, has to do with our project in progress that is called Diamond Future, and in which we are trying to think that this future doesn't have only to do with the diamond open access in terms of fees, but also in terms of rethinking what gives a journal the feature of an academic, autonomous, and quality journal to surpass the idea of indexation with a ranking. These are just photographs for you to see how these Latin American indexation systems were created in the 1970s. They were really indexation systems in the very librarian type of catalog, right? The idea was to show, to give visibility to all the journals that were not visibility because they didn't have the internet, right? And these indexing systems have a feature that is very different from the Science Citation Index or World Science Clarivate or Scopus. They do not create a ranking of journals. They have a qualitative type of indexation, which means that a journal is in or is out of these collections because of a set of criteria. In the case of Latindex, you can find more than 30, or Cielo 40, or Redalic 40, or more than 40. And so when you see a journal that is indexed in these curated type of lists, well, you can say that these journals have quality. These journals are quality journals, and we can separate or make a difference with other type of sources, which are really aggregators, search engines. I can see that I skipped that G there. I'm sorry. So Miguelim in Brazil, or maybe Miar, or other type of sources, they really are not lists or collections of journals that have been evaluated for entrance and that are evaluated regularly also to be expelled, right? And so our work now is to try to create a website. This is the website we're working on, and to try to offer the evaluators or the researchers information, complete reports on the indexation of the journals, to try to create an idea of what a quality journal is, beyond the very relevant fact, which is to go for no fee open access, right? And so just to finish here and some final remarks, I think that if we want to contribute with our type of studies, bibliometric studies or sociological studies, or the type of studies that, or even the economic studies of publishing that maybe the people that are here are interested in making, I think that the first thing is to have always in mind that we need a radical critique to the idea of excellence, that this idea of excellence requires these new data sources, and that we have to work really very hard to have, if Open Alex would be the source, to really include these regional type of indexing systems. And I think Latindex is the main depth there. And so the new Marie Curie project that was approved, in which I'm participating and let's say directing or coordinating the Latin American institutions, research teams that are part of this, include Latindex. And I think Latindex is the place where we need more resources, infrastructures for persistent identifiers to give visibility to this collection that may have at least 1,700 journals that are not part yet of Open Alex nor any other harvesting. I think that this is the way to really go for a more equitable and effective scholarly communication globally. I think that this notion of quality against research excellence does not mean that we are looking now for a ranking of quality, because that is going back to excellence. But instead of that, we really need to accept the radical definition of quality as a contextualized, in clear terms, a very diversified notion of quality that depends a lot on the context, right? And maybe just to end, relating the giving a very brief synthesis of what I see in Latin America, I think the publishing circuit that we have is a very good example of inclusive, multilingual, and very non-commercial type of openness. But its fragmentation that you could see in between these indexed systems that do not work in a regional infrastructure is a very difficult and very sad failure in terms of achieving our regional infrastructure that we have not been able to acquire yet. And this explains also the limited circulation. It's not only the visibility that we don't have because of the hierarchical mainstream type of indexation. This is what our part in the problem, right? So I think that diamond open access really needs investment, of course, to boost existing infrastructures like journal university portals in Latin America, for example. This is a matter of my most recent work. But essentially to also recover the scholarly publishing, the control of the scholarly publishing, and convince the research community to embrace the value of academic autonomy. So I think that we are in front of a crisis of the legitimacy of the mainstream indexing services, because predatory publishing or questionable journals have been found, as you have seen, not only in BPI or in the mega journals, but also in the collections that were really very legitimate or are very legitimate for our researchers in Web of Science or in Scopus. So I think it could be an opportunity for a change, and I hope we can all make a contribution to this path forward. Thank you.
Thank you for this brilliant, or maybe even diamond in this regard, presentation. I assume we can start the Q&A session. I just have to say that we promised to Professor Beigel to let her go at around 3 p.m. So I just would like to ask our audience to be concise with questions, so formulate them in rather short and concise manner, and then in such manner we can cover more questions. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor for everyone basically. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and we will address this question to our invited lecturer today. So please. Okay. A typical situation in the okay, we have two hands, and I also have a question, but I will let our guests first the floor. So please, Franciszek Krawczyk.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, like, super short question for me. Uh, how do you see a challenge of like finding reviewers in this like more local, you can say, or like this journals that are from outside the central countries? Because I believe like the scholarship on the topic, like for example, like studies by like Ronaldo Rodriguez Medina, or like my experience from Poland, like shows that a lot of this like journals that are published in Diamond Open Access more locally, they are struggling to find like quality, like good quality of like submissions, and also good reviewers for the journals.
Shall I answer, or you want to collect questions?
No, I think we can go one by one. Yes.
Yeah. In this case, even if it's not my recent work has not been concentrated in the problem of peer review, but indeed, the first thing I would like to say is that this problem is not only on the journals indexed in non-central type of collections. I mean, this is a problem also for the commercial publishers for all, because this has to do with the drain that I was mentioning in our paper, with this completely out of hands, massive growth of the papers. And so I think it's a problem of the whole communication system. And if you ask me the experience of the editors in Latin America, what I see, and I think they are loose assessments, they are in one of the journals, right? Because you asked for a review recently. But the difference, I think, is that in these journals, you don't have this speed that is demanded in other kind of journals, and especially in the mega journals, because the rush and the need for speed makes that the articles in the commercial publishers are published in, or attempted to publish in, less time. And the studies that you see in Latin America, for example, there's one very good from Redalic, shows that the speed of publishing is a lot slower in the Latin American journals. And so that means that, well, it's the most more than normal cycle, where you have to really wait and demand for reviewers. And the fact that you have some articles, or many of these articles are in Spanish and Portuguese, also it creates a different audience for these type of reviews, right? So I think the situations may be very different, but I've not been observing this. in my last research.
Okay, thank you for reply. So we moving further. I think there is a question by Lucia, so or at least by the audience. That is
by the room. Thank you.
Yeah, by the room. Yeah.
Fer, thank you for the conference. I was thinking of how these notions of excellence, whether imposed or incorporated, are also inserted in bigger changes in higher education in general, and how this idea of the neoliberal university comes to play as well. I was thinking of how authors like Diego Hurtado have characterized neoliberalism as a force that tends to push semi-peripheries into the peripheries. So I wanted to ask you if you would agree with this, or which other factors do you see that either facilitate or block this movement of semi-peripheries, whether upwards or downwards in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, I'm sharing again. I don't know if you're seeing this or not. It is there. Yeah, I'm just sharing it, Lucy, because I wanted to go back to the first figure, because what Diego Hurtado is proposing, I'm going to go to the neoliberal issue, but what Diego Hurtado is telling us is really that neoliberalism in the 1990s pushed our universities, our scientific fields towards the periphery, right? It's like this transition was, well, we were really relevant fields and we were peripheralized because of neoliberalism. But what I think is that our empirical studies show that this was not really the case, because we had in this period of the 1990s the concept that I've used is structural heterogeneity, because our elites were double faced. We had I've written several papers on the fact that our academic elites can face in both sides. We have internationalized academic elites that grew and really got integrated in this international or world academic system, especially in the biological sciences or exact and natural sciences. And of course, we still had very nationalized type of elites. And this has been studied also for the Arab world. For example, the very classical work now by Sari Yanafi on the people that write in Arabic and the people that write in English, and what that meant for these kind of national fields in the Arabic world. In Hanafi's words, that meant that you could be very prestigious in terms of an international conversation, but if you published in English and lived in Lebanon, for example, but you were completely peripheral in the national field and in the national relations of power. So what I found in Latin America is that in the national fields in the 1990s, there were some very strong structural factors that made that this national publishing in national languages and these nationally oriented elites were resilient, because the public universities, and the Argentinian case is really the most expressive one, because the public universities and their autonomy did not accept this sort of colonization of neoliberalism. They made a negotiation. The rectors, and particularly one organization that had a very strong agency, were the rectors' councils in Latin America, and particularly I could mention Chile or Argentina and Brazil. And they accepted the new forms of evaluation via the accreditation of external agencies and the decision of funding through these type of evaluations. But the autonomy of the universities created a parallel value regimes. And the Argentinian case, which you know very well, is a case in which we have two national accreditation systems. The university accreditation system, which is completely different with other standards, with a person can be in the highest category and never have one publication, one international publication, or one publication in English, and the other one, which is the CONICET accreditation. So I really think that there you can find a very good example that neoliberalism was not imposed in a colonial style. I don't know if I'm clear enough for you, see there.
Well, for me at least, the answer was clear. I do not know what Lucia. Yeah, Lucia, please, what do you think? What?
Hi, everyone. I'm a visiting scholar from China. I ask a question. Is the central bottleneck of open science rooted in the transformation of publishing model, or in the persistence of existing research evaluation system?
You know that
Yeah.
there is an
In the context of China's increasing emphasis on domestic evaluation frameworks, such as Chinese Academy of Science, give a new emergency gender ranking systems. Does this shift have the potential to advance open science, or does it risk further marginalizing it? Thank you.
I think I understood. Yes. I think I understood. Because you're talking about the recent shift in evaluation in China. It is a very complex thing because there is a change, but the Academy of Sciences in China still has a very powerful agency in terms of the legitimation of the papers. But I would like to give more the example of Chile in Latin America, because in China this is starting, but in Chile what I found was that, in contrast with Argentina, where you can see this nationally oriented type of researchers that publish in Spanish, publish in national journals, and they can even, not only in the universities, they can even be in this more internationalized agency that is called CONICET, the organization with more international type of academic prestige or concern for the international prestige. But in Chile, what I found is that they are really the survival of the old concept of excellence is still intact. And that's what I would ask you really to tell me, because I've not worked on China enough to say it, or maybe Vincent and other people that have worked on China today. But the concept of excellence is completely intact, and the changes in Chile have driven the national journals to ossicize. That's the word we're using, like the hypothesis made by other researchers in Chile and my team in Chile that we're working now on. Because the idea is that this kind of nationalism has taken the national journals to address only the indexation in Web of Science, to address only these type of impact factor indexations. So they are national journals. They are supposedly rewarding the publication in a national journal, but only if it is in Web of Science. And so I think that we have to take into account that sometimes the major issue is in the standards that are considered in the evaluation criteria, not only if we accept national publishing or not. That's what I could say, because I don't know if I understand completely your question now.
Okay, thank you for the reply. I think we can conclude our Q&A session here, because we promised to let you go at 3 p.m. Central European time, but it's already like 4 minutes past 3. in local time. So I would like to thank you for the presentation once again, and for the answering all the questions here. We will be following your further work, and I hope at some point maybe we'll get in touch once again. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you very much to all. Thank you, Ivan and Christian. Thank you for the invitation.
But for the